Anyway, folks, really thanks for coming to the Saturday Speaker Lectures. I'm Susan Doniger. I'm on the board of the Humboldt County Historical Society, and this Saturday Speaker Series is a partnership between the Humboldt County Library. Oh, is it on? No.
I don't think they're hearing you in the back.
Hello?
It's going to the live stream, so you're good. I think everybody here.
Thank you. IT mistake. Tech lexic. This is a partnership between the Humboldt County Library, the Clark Museum, and the Humboldt County Historical Society. And of course, as this is a free series, it is free, but we welcome your donations if you'd like to join, and or if you'd like to join the Clark or the Historical Society. We would certainly welcome your membership. Anyway, this is so cool. Nothing like a double murder to get people out and about. This is, and we want to thank our sponsors, Carl Johnson's and the Cutting Edge Hair Salon, for their generous support of the series. I wanted to introduce independent project manager, local historian, and author, Lynette Mullen. Lynette will take us back to the 1920s to examine and explore what I'm calling one of the most infamous cold case murders in Humboldt County during Prohibition, so about 100 years ago. So really appreciate, Lynette has been doing all sorts of really cool research for a number of years on many diverse topics, and we really welcome her on this newest one. So thank you, Lynette.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming today. I am very excited to be here. As Susan said, I'm a local historian, and I have to admit that I kind of ran across this story on accident. I honestly tried to avoid the story for a while. So years ago, I was researching, unfortunately, an unsolved murder of a Native woman. Her name was Lucy, and she lived in Arcata in the 1860s. And whenever I would share the story about Lucy, there would be people that would say, you know the story you really need to do? You need to do the story of Jack Ryan. That's the one you really need to write about. And I was busy with Lucy, and I'm like, whatever. There's always going to be something else people are going to think I need to do. Fair enough. But when I was researching Lucy, I'd go into stores, I'd ask for, do you have old newspapers? Do you have journals? Do you have anything, right? Old books, clues, right? And at an antique store that used to be here in Eureka, the staff said, well, we've got this trunk full of old papers. And so I can't, maybe $20 or something. And I bought, I should have brought all of them, bags full of newspapers. And I started going through them. And what I realized is not only were there old newspapers in that collection, there were Christmas cards, there was a planner. And that trunk, that collection of paper had belonged to Stephen Metzler. Stephen Metzler was the district attorney that worked for Humboldt County at the time that Jack Ryan ended up being convicted, ended up going to prison for these murders. So this person that everybody had told me I needed to research, now I had this stuff in my house. You can only ignore it for so long, apparently. So that is what got me further into this particular story. So with that, I will jump in. Oh, but first I want to thank the Clark and the Historical Society again for hosting. I appreciate it. And thank you guys all for coming. And thank you whoever's online watching. And so let me get started here. I guess we'll have to, oops, there we go. So this, in that collection, Metzler's collection, was a newspaper that had this particular photo. And this is during Jack Ryan's first trial. You'll learn more about that in a little bit. But I'm going to back up a minute. So we're going to talk about temperance, and we're going to talk about prohibition, just a little bit of background, because the double murders that I'll be talking about today happened in 1925. So right in the heart of prohibition. But prohibition didn't start in the 1920s. There was a movement, a temperance movement, way back, and even in California, by the 1870s, women especially, and this illustration shows you why, women especially were really pushing for prohibition because unfortunately there was a huge correlation between men drinking and violence in the home, or men not coming home, that sort of thing. So there was a big effort to try to end alcohol. Oh, and I can't read my little things here. I'm gonna have to make it bigger somehow. Excuse me, I am gonna have to take a break and get my reading glasses. It's a good thing I brought them. All right, hopefully this will work for me. Okay, so local option laws. So this was kind of an interesting part of prohibition. So local options, there were people that wanted communities to decide whether or not they were going to issue liquor licenses. So that was something that was suggested. It didn't in fact happen, in part because Americans were paying $60 million a year in the 1870s for alcohol. It was quite the business. In the 1880s, again, the local option law did not go through, and so liquor licenses were available. It was a way that municipalities and governments could make money. Women weren't necessarily allowed in saloons, and there was an 11 p.m. ordinance, and that happened throughout California, but even here. So saloons were supposed to close by 11 p.m. They felt like that would help. But they could stay open all night if they paid $100 as their license. So that was kind of interesting. By the 1890s, there was another proposal to close saloons, but of course that failed. And the cities and counties, in part, the reason it failed is because it was such a revenue generator. By the early 1900s, municipalities were also making money by fining people who were selling liquor without a license. In fact, our ladies of the evening in the houses, the brothels that ran in Eureka, the city of Eureka would not issue liquor licenses to the ladies, but they would arrest them every 6 months or so. They would fine them $30, the ladies, or it was $30 bail. The ladies would forfeit their bail, and basically that was the equivalent of their liquor license. They'd be left alone for another 6 months. So lots and lots and lots of money. The debate did continue, though. People felt like it contributed to social ills, to crime, violence, that alcohol just was not a good thing. And as you know, in 1919, the Volstead Act was passed. In January of 1920, the U.S. was dry, at least legally. Alcohol was, tossed out, literally. A lot of symbolic things happened, just signifying that this was a big deal and our country had changed. But of course, it hadn't, because just because alcohol was illegal didn't mean people didn't want to drink. Submarines, literally submarines, were bringing alcohol in to different areas. There was a lot of bootlegging going on, a lot of moonshine, even when and this is the second one here, the one on the right, even when people were being warned that moonshine could make you go blind, people still take the chance and drink. So here. So this, I don't know how many people are familiar with this building. Unfortunately, the restaurant is now closed, but this was Roy's. And in the 1920s, this was a speakeasy. Part of it was a cigar store, and in the back was a speakeasy. And part of what was fun is I just found this kind of on accident. This is an article about the speakeasy getting raided by the dry squad. And the dry squad would come in, break a bottle of liquor. Evo, who owns it now and grew up there, would say that as soon as a bottle was broken, they would stop the raid. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But he did say every once in a while, they would be arrested, they'd have to go to the jail, but that they left the doors unlocked. His mother would go down there and cook for everybody in the jail. Evo and his sister would run around and play in the jail. A very different time, but it happened. Oops. Alcohol was illegal, he said, but everybody took bribes, including the sheriff. They'd all be drinking here one week, and the next week they'd raid us. So that's what was going on in Humboldt County. The other thing about Humboldt County, very isolated, right? Incredibly isolated. So people were bootlegging. Not only, Evo's dad apparently had a still at the south end of G Street in Arcata. But the hills offered a lot of places for people to go. And of course, this was illegal. There was a lot of money involved. It was criminal. So not everybody, the bankers weren't necessarily involved. There was maybe a certain type of people, character of people that were drawn to that sort of activity. But Humboldt County, so this is the Showers Pass area. This is eastern Humboldt County, middle of nowhere. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there were two young people, Henry Sweet and Carmen Wagner, who went hunting. And now Carmen grew up, at least for a while, lived out there. So she was very, very familiar with the area. And this is the family's cabin, actually, which apparently still stands out there. Yes, that folks that know are nodding their heads. So Carmen was very familiar with this area. They went out to go hunting, but unfortunately they did not come home. They found Sweet's body on October 11th, so this is 1925. So they found Henry Sweet. He had been murdered. He had been shot. There was a rifle. Carmen's rifle was found near his body, but this was days later. Carmen was nowhere. They couldn't find her. And in fact, there were reports that she was being seen in town, which was very confusing, right? Her boyfriend's dead. Why would she be in town? But there were also disturbing things that were found. Part of her silk stocking was found near the murder location. There were all these different things going on. But of course, people got very concerned about Carmen's fate. They didn't know what happened to her. People were interviewed. This guy out of Oakland, there were a lot of people that were interviewed and asked about Carmen. People were very concerned. Unfortunately, on October 23rd, Carmen's body was found. And as somebody just pointed out, somebody who's here, and as I said, kind of warned you, there are folks in the room that know more about this case than I do even. Carmen's body was found in a very isolated area. It sounds like it was pretty miraculous that it was found at all. So that kind of adds to the mystery as to maybe who helped to locate her body. Unfortunately, she was dead. People didn't know, right? A double murder in 1925. People were concerned. People were understandably anxious. People wanted to know who was responsible. What ended up happening within a day, two brothers were identified. So these, and you'll have to, please forgive the vernacular, but they were called half-breed Indians. The newspapers would use that term a lot. And so these were half Native American young brothers, half-brothers, and they were suspected of committing the murders. The only thing that tied them initially to the murders was their proximity to where the bodies were found, but they weren't even all that close to the bodies. But it was a very difficult time for the indigenous people here, and they were easy scapegoats. All kinds of stories circulated, that Carmen had been alive, that she'd been a slave, all these different things had happened. There was some suggestion that a third person was involved in this murder, and so they were looking at that for a while. And as you can see, it also mentions that that Jack and his brother were talking to an attorney. So they did get an attorney. They also brought in a criminologist. So basically, they brought in an expert from Berkeley to look at this. It was this guy here. He was called the America's Sherlock Holmes. So but it was a big deal. He was very scientific, okay? And this was a new thing. Criminal forensics was kind of a new thing at that time. But they even brought him in because they're trying to figure out this murderer. He spent 6 days out there in the hills trying to find evidence, trying to figure out what happened. These were some of his findings. That Sweet was killed on the spur of the moment by a pistol, so pistol shot. Carmen's murder was delayed and deliberate, so that was another of his findings. More than one person involved, so he believed that to be true. That Carmen was killed within hours of Sweet's murder. So this is very different. Early on, people were saying that Carmen had been held for 5 days. He said, no, that's not what happened, that actually she had been killed right away and then moved. Sorry? Okay. And he believed that Carmen and Henry Sweet probably knew the person that killed him. The other thing that Heinrich found was an ancient altar, he said, used in phallic worship. There since the days that the fierce wind tune, and that's the way they spelled it back then, ruled the area, okay? He said it looked abandoned, like this altar hadn't been used in a very long time, but Carmen's body was only 100 yards away, so pretty close to it. So what he said is the altar may have nothing to do with it, but it can't be overlooked. And of course, the media grabbed onto that one, right? You're looking at Native Americans, you're looking at some sort of ancient rite that maybe she was sacrificed, that sort of thing. So the media had a field day. And by now, this is national news. Everybody is watching this case, trying to figure out what's going on. And the two brothers were officially charged with her murder. One of the things during the discovery, now that they had Carmen's body, is they had noticed that she had skin under her fingernails. It looked like she had fought back. And Walter David, so the brother Walter David, had scratches on his face. And Walter would say, well, I was riding a horse and the brush just scratched my face. But everybody thought that those scratches in the fingernail stuff might be connected. But Walter David ended up with an alibi, pretty strong alibi pretty early on. So charges were dropped against him. They then there was another witness that came in and basically said that the Sherlock Holmes guy didn't know what he was talking about. He had matched bullets to a gun. And so we had contradictory witnesses saying that this guy didn't know what he was talking about. One of the other big pieces of evidence people thought were goat hairs that were found with Carmen's body and in the area of Henry Sweet's murder. And Jack Ryan, the other brother, had goat-haired chaps. And so people are like, obviously there's a connection there, until they found out that goats were being herded and cared for in that area a lot. Very simple explanation for having goat hair in that area that had absolutely nothing to do with Jack. So this again is the photo of Jack Ryan, right? So they go in, trial happens, and Jack is acquitted. Not enough evidence, really no evidence, tying either one of the brothers to Carmen and Henry Sweet's murder. And that's where I'm going to take a little break and refer to these. Yes, sir?
My memory is that Jack was initially charged and went to trial for the murder of Henry Sweet.
Oh, when I read it, it was,
And he got
okay.
off of that.
Okay, yes.
So then there's not double jeopardy.
Got it. Okay. All right. Got it. So that could have been the end of the story, except it wasn't. So I mentioned finding these newspapers in a trunk. And these newspapers belong to Stephen Metzler. There he is. So Stephen Metzler was an attorney here in Humboldt County, and Stephen Metzler followed this case carefully, very carefully. So in that collection of newspapers, we've got the bullets. We've got, you know, when they thought the girl was seen in public, and you guys can look at these after, the key bullet evidence that the other experts said wasn't true. All of this information, right? So Metzler was following all this. And then Metzler decided to run for DA. And Metzler was absolutely sure that he could solve this double murder if he was the district attorney here in Humboldt County. And there's a photo of him. And so Metzler started working, and he and started talking about this again. The father, Carmen's father, offered a reward, right? So this right now, this is kind of Metzler tracking. what happened, collecting the newspapers from the time when he starts working on the case again. He starts saying he can solve this. He actually has Carmen's body exhumed to look at it because Metzler is saying he didn't even know if it was Carmen. Of course, Carmen's father said absolutely that had been her. He'd identified her. But Metzler insisted on looking at her body again. Dental records confirmed it was, in fact, Carmen. Still looking, search for fiends to be reopened. So he's working very, very hard to figure out who is doing this. Let's see if there's anything else. New leads. He keeps saying new leads. They've got new information, new light. All these is being shown on this. All of this different stuff is happening. And by then, Metzler, of course, is the DA, right? So this is what he's doing. He's worked hard. Not a whole lot is happening, but yeah. So Metzler keeps saying he's going to solve this case, keeps working. And in the fall of 1927, Walter David, so Jack Ryan was the person that ended up being tried and acquitted. Walter David, Jack's brother, is found murdered. There's a little bit of confusion as to the cause of death. His body was found, but the coroner, and there were stories that he was actually strangled with barbed wire. But that I have not found from the newspaper accounts at the time. Basically what I have read is that the coroner talked about the bones, from in the spinal column being stretched, and so it did look like he had been hung. And then his body had been cut down, but they believed that that was how Walter David died. Through other information, and I'm hoping that Frederick Foster is watching, because when this started being advertised, people were reaching out with information, and again, we'll have more later. But with the information that I got from Frederick, so after Jack Ryan's brother was killed, he starts getting letters that the same thing's going to happen to him, that he needs to be careful, that his life is in danger. And in fact, in May, so this is all kind of getting drug out, but in Maine, 2 gunmen actually shot at Jack Ryan as he was crossing over a bridge. He survived, but certainly his life was at risk, right? He was already feeling, I'm sure, like his life was in danger. And then, and I don't think I have the date on here, so I apologize. Whoops. So sorry about this. In 1928, and I apologize for I don't have the date here. 2 girls, oh, here we are. What's it say on there?
Yeah. July 13th.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so in July, thank you. Jack Ryan is accused of rape. So keep in mind, he is a half Native American, half-breed Indian, as the media portrayed him. And he is accused of raping young white girls. He is arrested. He is interrogated. He is interrogated all night. And by morning, Stephen Metzler has a confession. The confession was in Stephen's collection, and it basically describes him meeting Henry Sweet, Carmen Wagner, and killing them. And again, you guys can look at this later. I've got this information. Very big deal. Metzler is successful. Literally within 24 hours of Jack Ryan's confession, he is taken down to San Quentin. 30 years. He's been sentenced and taken down to San Quentin within 24 hours. Good for Metzler. So, Stephen Metzler. So Stephen Metzler in 1931, officials finally realized that this district attorney who had a dry squad was raiding Roy's, raiding all of these speakeasies, raiding all of these. He was collecting the booze and then selling it out of the courthouse. He got caught. Yeah. So there's Mr. Metzler. Yeah. Yeah. He tried for probation, didn't get it initially. He was released, and then he actually ended up getting pardoned in 1939. So went back to pardoned.
Oh, pardon.
So he went back to practicing law. While this is happening, Jack Ryan's sitting in San Quentin. He tried at various times to get out. In 1930, he said, "I confessed, but I didn't do it." And at some point, and I can't remember where I saw the quote, but basically what Jack Ryan said is, I had been accused of raping young girls. It was safer for me in prison than it was in that community. He had also been threatened with his brother's fate. So it was also safer in prison than getting murdered in his community. And he explained that that was why he confessed to the double murder. In 1932, they did reopen the investigation, but it was determined pretty quickly that there wasn't enough evidence to even retry Jack, let alone release him. He asked for a commutate, I can't even say that word right, to have his sentence commuted in 1950, didn't happen. You can see in 53, he's still being termed the Slayer rapist. But he is released. He ends up in Bernie, and he ends up actually working for the equivalent, like the state roads. And dies at 75 years old. I just have a little bit more. Okay, unless I got something wrong.
Well, no, I guess not, but I got a point.
Okay, well, wait, I'm very excited. As I said, there are folks in the room that know more about this case than I do. And so I'm hoping they'll stick around and maybe answer some questions. So Jack Ryan was finally able to get out of prison, and he passed away. And that would have been the end of the story, except for this guy. So in the 1980s, this is Richard Walton. In the 1980s, he, and this is what I read with the clippings that I had, not Metzler's clippings, but with the clippings that I had, that there was a woman who had just passed away in the hospital, and on her deathbed confessed that Jack Ryan had never raped her or her daughter. I can't remember if it was her or her daughter, and said that Metzler had paid her $100 to accuse Jack Ryan of rape. This had weighed on her entire life. And so she finally told people that this is what happened. This is what Metzler had done. Well, Richard Walton became very interested in this. He was an investigator for the district attorney's office. He literally spent 13 years, traveled to San Francisco, traveled all over the place, talked to hundreds of people. And he was looking, even though Jack Ryan had already passed away, he was looking to have him pardoned. And he succeeded. Yeah. Nope, not quite done. Got a little more. But so the governor pardoned him, said they acknowledged the injustice. He was a young man, the wrong place, the wrong time, and he was railroaded into it. And yes, he was. Yeah. Jack spent over 9,000 days in prison for murder he didn't commit. 2 murders he didn't commit. So this could be the end of the story, except. So these newspapers that I talked about, these are Metzler's. So Metzler tracked the murder before he was ever DA, swore that he would solve the murder, absolutely knew that Jack Ryan had nothing to do with the murder, and yet sent him to prison for years anyway. And it wasn't honestly until I was preparing for this presentation that I really started looking through the papers that he had collected. And not only had he tracked this crime from the time that it started, he was apparently hopefully appalled, but I don't think so. He kept clippings, multiple clippings, with the headlines, "When Jack confessed," when he was coerced into confessing, even though this man knew that Jack hadn't done it. Clearly proud of the confession that he was able to get. He also tracked it when Jack in 1930 denied the murder, when Jack finally spoke up and said, "Hey, I didn't actually do this." For some reason, he felt safe enough. Metzler kept multiple copies of that too. Metzler, this is Metzler's planner. This is his planner from 1945. My guess is that his newspaper collection went into that trunk and got sold when he passed away. So what I used to call his ego collection, I don't think it was a guilty conscience, but it's possible it was. He held on to these things for years and years, knowing exactly what he'd done to this innocent man. The other thing he knew is that Carmen Wagner and Henry Sweet's murderer was still out there. And even though he was the district attorney, he didn't do a thing about it. And to this day, at least officially, their murders remain unsolved. And that is it. And with that, I will say that I was told I had about 40 minutes, but it's only 3 o'clock. And so we've got some folks here I'm sure people would love to hear what else you know about this case or what you'd like to share.
Well, a couple of things.
Oh, you know what? Would you be willing?
Sure.
Maybe.
Can I reach it?
I don't know how to turn it on. Do we have a tech person here maybe that can help? Is there?
You got it. Is it on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm all choked up, sorry. When they went hunting, they got permission to use a cabin about maybe a quarter to a half mile from the Wagner home site. And that's where the murder occurred. I've been to that site. And there's nothing but boards on the ground where that cabin was. The Wagner cabin still stands. I rebuilt it, actually, to keep it from falling into the soil. There were newspapers upstairs with a really creaky, little, narrow, unfinished attic. And on the wall, there's newspaper of stuff that would be interesting to a young girl.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if it was Carmen's or another girl, but Carmen's family left there before, I think 1920 maybe. Carmen would have been like 15 at that time, 13, because I think she was only 18 when she was murdered.
Yeah.
Supposedly, her and her boyfriend were into the liquor stuff. Now, she was supposedly had a beauty parlor in Ferndale with a speakeasy out the back door, what they called it. And her boyfriend was hijacking whiskey from some of these mountains. That's what the story was. And that's why they were murdered.
That sounds like a motive for murder.
And one other point is when Jack was released from prison, I remember that because I remember reading it in the paper at the time. He was released on the condition that he never come to Humboldt County again. And he did. He moved to Redding area where he lived out the rest of his life. He was interviewed different times by people, and he always said it didn't do it. But, you know, we don't know who did it, but we think it's related to whiskey making in the hills.
That makes sense. There was a lot of money. Well, and Metzler was involved, clearly involved in bootlegging and liquor. And so maybe it was partner of his that was actually involved, because it was such a strange thing that he fixated on the brothers and then on Jack Ryan, despite them having no connection. But they were easy scapegoats back then, unfortunately.
There was a screenplay written by a lady a few years ago. I don't know if it ever went anywhere, but I have a copy of it. And her screenplay suggests that a certain family was involved, and that possibly Jack might have been riding by the trail near where her body was found she was found in the middle of a creek bed that runs down toward the Van Dusen River from, actually the creek originates at Showers Rock and runs down to Van Dusen River, and there was a trail that went by there to the properties down by the river, and that her body wasn't too far from the trail, but it was in this creek, and it was covered with silt, and as long with her dog, Toto, something like that.
It was murdered.
Who was also shot.
That's right.
And searchers had been going down the creek area, but they couldn't really go in. It was so steep in there that they couldn't see it all. Well, it had rained hard, and another crew went up the creek, and there under a waterfall is where her body was found, in the silt of the creek bed with her arm or something sticking out, and the dog was there, and they located her there. And this was probably 3 miles from where Henry Sweet was
Oh, wow.
murdered, and in very rugged part of it.
There's another woman, if you don't mind me calling you out. Oh, yeah. Well, you had just made the point that it would have been incredibly difficult to find her body where it was, which would lead one to believe that perhaps somebody in the search party maybe knew a little more than they were letting on about what had happened to Carmen.
That's really rugged country up there.
Yes.
And that creek that is.
Um,
When he's finished,
So we've got great historians here, Arlene.
you know what? I just had a short one. I got interested in the Carmen Wagner murder years ago because my mother told me her brother and my uncle did not murder Carmen Wagner. And I would wonder, what the heck? But I did know that he was about the same age as Harry, and I bet I'm sure he must have gone to school with them. But he also was stealing other people's booze. And I think it's a miracle that he lived to be an old man in his 90s instead of being murdered. But he was stealing it, and my aunt told me that he would race down to San Francisco to get rid of the booze, and she would have a rifle as a passenger. She was his gun moll. And I thought, my gosh. And then as he got older, he retired and was a used car salesman. So he came out okay. But Richard Walton went down to San Francisco to interview him for his book, and unfortunately my uncle wouldn't talk about it. So, and I'm amazed that he was able to get as much as he could. And I do have a question. I heard that Richard did not complete his book because he got death threats. Did he complete it? Or do you know?
He ended up writing a book on cold cases. So in later years, the investigator that ended up succeeding in getting Jack Ryan pardoned became an expert on cold case files, and he's actually teaching at the university in Utah. So he did publish a book, and this was one of the stories in the book, but he did not do an independent book specifically on this case.
Yeah, because we went to listen to his talk up in, I think, Neyland years ago, and he was in the middle of working on that book at that time. But I was hoping he would have finished the book, but he went on to other things.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Anyone else?
Yeah, anybody else have anything you want to share about this story, things you've heard?
In the form of a question.
you
Do I need the mic? Sure.
You did it? Jerry, you want to give him?
First. So, a district attorney, this is how it's supposed to sound on the mic, it's like that. Not like an ice cream cone, come on. So a district attorney, someone who runs for the office of district attorney, can clearly see that he has a lot of power. And if I'm selling liquor and I know I'm doing it wrong, and it's the wrong thing to do, wouldn't it be really handy to be the district attorney so that cases that come to me have a great deal of discretion about which ones are further investigated? And another part of your little story, I might surely have they had investigators who worked for the DA who had pistols, and they knew the bridges. And they said, when that guy comes, you don't care who he is, just shoot at him. I mean, the guy would have lots of power, and he doesn't sound like an honorable man in any way. So he has Carmen. Did he have Carmen killed? I can't get that part. No. But he definitely sees Jack and his brother as being Native Americans. A lot of prejudice was against them. He knew that he would get sympathy in that way. I don't think he knew it would blow up as big as it did, but it did. How's that for a wrap?
I think that's great. Thank you very much.
And poor Carmen, I think there was something connected. There was another reason why Carmen was killed.
He was with Jack Ryan.
Well, I had never heard the story that she had a speakeasy.
They're talking ahead of me, so I couldn't hear with no mic. Sorry.
Well, you probably know the theory was that she wasn't at the camp when he was killed. They didn't, actually, nobody knew she was with him, because when they first investigated the murder of him up there, they didn't know that somebody else had been with him.
Oh, I thought they had, because they were searching for her. They knew she was missing.
Well, they found a camera, and they sent it to Eureka right away and got the film developed, and there she was in the picture at that site. Huh. So it triggered the investigation, and there were posses, fairly good-sized posses riding horseback all over the country looking for her.
Yeah.
And it was one of those posse members that found her body eventually.
Fascinating. How did you make it work? Anyway, I don't know that I need this. Any other questions? Any other theory? Yes, sir.
You don't mention anything about Henry Sweet. Wasn't he killed with Carmen Wagner?
He was the first one killed. His body was found first. Her rifle ended up being found nearby, and initially the theory was that her gun was used to shoot him, but then later it was a pistol, and the forensic investigator from Berkeley said, yeah, no, the bullets match. It was definitely this gun. I mean, so they didn't, I think there were a lot of theories. Forensics has come a long way since then. But yes, he was found, and it was 10, 11 days later that Carmen's body was found.
What's the two hunters?
Where is David Walton?
I'm sorry?
Where is David Walton?
Well, Richard Walton was the investigator in the 1980s. Walter David was Jack Ryan's half-brother.
I'm talking about the sheriff.
Metzler.
Metzler?
Oh, Metzler?
No, Walton. Richard Walton.
Where's
The writer.
Richard Walton.
And your question is?
The sheriff that started the investigation to prove that
Yeah.
Jack Ryan didn't do it.
So he works for a university in Utah now.
Oh, he does?
Yes, and he teaches forensics and as
Writing
We were just talking about that. I don't think he wrote an independent book, but he wrote a book of various cold cases, and this is one of the stories that was featured in the book.
So I think we got figured out that Jack Ryan was falsely accused and used to help that guy get into office. I will find him.
Absolutely.
And then he gets into office. And then he gets rid of him by making up a rape. That part's cool, but what about those two original guys that Jack Ryan is accused of killing? Did they get the solution of who killed those guys? Did we get that?
The murders were never solved.
We got stuck on Carmen and Jack.
No, well, yeah, Carmen Wagner and Henry Sweet were the only two people.
Arrested for
Carmen Wagner and Walter Sweet.
Or Henry Davids. Henry
was
Sweet,
the
yeah.
hunter.
Henry Sweet.
And Street was her boyfriend, and they were on a hunting trip together
Yeah.
to Coyote Flat, where his body was found next to this abandoned cabin that they had permission to camp on. It was right near the Wagner cabin, but I don't know why they didn't use the Wagner cabin, but maybe it was being used by the Hunt family that had bought the Wagner homestead in the meantime,
Yeah.
and or somebody else. There was another nearby homesteader that had borrowed that cabin for a while to use it while they were building their own cabin. So I don't know the time frame in there, but
Yeah. Yeah. So other questions, thoughts, theories?
I guess
Arlene's
share
got
one
one.
more. It's it's pre-murder, but I said my uncle was one of the ones stealing booze. My husband's uncle was the guy who drove the dry squad around to catch the bad guys. So we got both in the family.
And my uncle said that at the time that Jack was finally arrested and brought in, that they got to Ryan Slough and the posse had him, or the police had him, and they said, "You better confess to that murder, or we're going to throw you off this bridge into Humboldt Bay Slough." And Ryan Slough. So he was, like you said, in fear of his life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense literally. And I wish I had the direct quote, but he said, prison was safer for me than being in Humboldt County.
Or being around the district attorney.
Absolutely.
In his
Yeah.
profession, yeah.
Right. But once he was accused of rape, then anybody could have gone after him.
Right.
So, yeah, we've got a question or a comment up back here.
I was just wanting to clarify, was the ancient artifact site found near Carmen's body?
Yeah, about 300 yards, and I think it was a big stretch. But the media, quite frankly, I mean, we're talking 1920s media, but they just grabbed on to that idea of her being a victim of some ancient mystical Indian rites, so that made the news for a while.
Did they ever figure out what the artifact actually was?
No, it was, I mean, and it sounded like it was really rough, like just some area. I can pull the newspaper articles about it. It wasn't super specific, and it looked like it had been long abandoned, if that's even what it was, because these were white guys, frankly, interpreting an area up in the hills, and they didn't know a thing about it. So he may have just made it all up. Who knows? But it kind of fit. It fit with the narrative that they were looking for. So. Anything else?
I just had a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what time of year the murder happened, and I'm thinking, was her body actually found buried, or could she have washed down the creek and ended up at the bottom of the falls and covered by sediment?
They'd gone hunting, deer hunting, in late September.
It was October. That's right. The bodies were found in October. Thank you. Yeah. So water flows probably at that time of year probably wouldn't have happened.
It had rained.
So, I mean, it's possible.
The creek went and
Maybe
came
a
up.
possibility, but who knows?
Yeah.
Humboldt County.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, there's a really good book about prohibition in California. It's called One Eye Closed, the Other Eye Read. And it discusses a lot about Humboldt County because we were actually an import center for alcohol, because they would send in, the fishing boats would go out and meet the loaded boat, and the first boat in would go all the way down to Fields Landing and take a nice slow time and go by the Coast Guard, and everybody else would follow him down to Fields Landing, which takes a long time from the entrance. And the other boats would come in to Eureka and unload, and the liquor would actually be out of Humboldt County before they actually stopped the guy in Fields Landing, and that boat didn't have any alcohol on it.
Wow.
One eye closed, the other eye read.
So in case not everybody, one eye closed, the other eye read, and I've already written that down. Well, Evo, so when I was talking to Evo, and again, he grew up, his mom got tired, so they lived at South G when they were running the speakeasy here in Eureka, and Evo said his mom got tired of his dad being gone all the time. And so they moved the family to the apartment above this speakeasy. And they would always get warned. It was a cousin or something worked in the sheriff's department or the police department. And so they'd always get warned when they were going to get raided. And so they'd literally put a liquor bottle out where it could be found easily, and then the raid would stop. But Evo would say that his dad would make runs down south, and sometimes they would take Evo and his sister were kids. And Evo said that basically the liquor would be in the back of the car, the dad would put a mattress over the liquor, and then say, okay, kids, if we get stopped, you're sleeping. And Evo said at least once he remembers driving south, and him and his sister are on there, and the dad gets stopped. And Evo is in the back of the car with his sister, and he remembers his dad saying, no, of course I don't have any liquor, but officer, could you please be quiet, because my kids are sleeping in the back. He had all kinds of stories. He'd talk about there were, in the 20s and 30s, where the shanty is now, and the schooner, I guess, is what the other one. Somebody there was some sort of a carport in the back, and there was this big Studebaker that would come up periodically and park in there. And he never knew exactly like who it was, but him and his sister just loved this fancy car, right? And they would see the car. But then he would end up with some of the people that were hanging out in those bars. They'd have pickup baseball games in the parking lot. And it was only later, with adults, and they were just kids playing with these guys. As an adult, people went to Eva and like, do you realize who you were playing ball with? That was like Machine Gun Kelly. It was the big gangsters that would come up here and hide when things got, too hot, wherever they were. They'd come up and hang out in Humboldt County for a while. Eva's 103, and it has incredible stories. Incredible stories. So.
Wow.
So we were a sanctuary city.
Yes, indeed. All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
One of the problems with the way the prohibition laws were is you could only bust a place for alcohol that was there where people were drinking it. So people were served shots, they were served it in coffee cups, because if the cops came knocking, you shot it, there's no evidence. And another way that they got the things down is you'll find in a lot of our really old bars, they kept all the piping and everything for the gas lights. And the booze was up in the top story, and they had the booze come down through the pipes, and they could just fill it up right there, but there wasn't any booze in the building. It was somewhere else.
That is so great. Was there somebody else with a hand? Yes.
So I had a question called in. Could you expand upon that there was a play? Was there a play made about this?
Oh, there was a screenplay. So at different times, people have looked at this story and wanted to share it. I mean, it's a big story. And there was a screenplay written. I don't know that the production has ever happened, but there is a screenplay out there.
I have a copy of that.
Oh, there we go. Yes. This gentleman here says he has a copy of the screenplay. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Well,
Story. Thank you, Lynette.
oh yeah, no, thank you guys so much. And I so appreciate the other information. This just made it so much more fun to have folks in the audience. I knew there'd be people here that knew more than me, and I just so appreciate you sharing, so thank you.